Hi folks, today we're going to talk Researching Arguments Chapter 4. During this chapter, we're going to review and understand the research process, learn how to evaluate sources, and discuss how to avoid plagiarism. One big method to evaluating sources in current day is the SIFT method. The SIFT method is simple. It combines a lot of other methods that have been previously used to really look especially at digital sources. So SIFT stands for Stop, Investigate the Source, Find Better Coverage, and Trace the Claims. And so if you remember this method, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later in this lesson, if you remember this method and apply it, you're going to avoid falling into misinformation, biased sources, and you'll be able to find strong academic research for your next speech. So what is research? Research is the process of discovering new knowledge. It's an ongoing dialogue. Research is constantly happening, and especially when it comes to technology and medicine and the STEM field, we know changes are constantly happening. So research helps you investigate those different points of view and find the most reflective information. So speaking of reflecting, what do you think of when you hear the word research? How do you know a source is credible? One thing I hear from students all the time is, why are credible sources important? Why can't I just Google it or use AI to gather information? Well, Google is a search engine that has algorithms that are tailored to your interests and your views. So if you're using a search engine multiple times, it's trained to kind of discover and look at what you're most likely to look at. There's also paid sources that are going to come to the top of those searches because they are popular, because they're paying in advertising. And so Google it's not necessarily bad, but it's not how you want to conduct your academic research. ChatGPT and other AI models are large language models, meaning they are just pulling information from all over the internet, especially those popular sources, and they're compiling it into what looks like credible and academic research, but it could largely have misinformation. And so it's not authored by a person, it's not vetted, it's not necessarily backed in credible research. So even if it looks good, doesn't mean it has the right information or the most up-to-date information. Especially large language models are behind in that information too. So these are not bad places to look for general knowledge, but when you're doing academic research, you don't want to be using these sources, especially blindly. So why does research matter? Research builds confidence and credibility as a speaker. It helps you to support your claims. It helps to open up new ideas and perspectives. It also helps us to understand what is true and what is false. And as I've said, things online can be posted by anybody, and really making sure that you're finding accurate and credible information is essential to our democracy. It's essential to our environment, and it's so important that we are critically thinking about the pieces of information we hear from anywhere we are encountering information. So getting started, I love going to the local library, whether that is a college, whether that is our local community. The libraries have great resources of information and often have a lot of resources on their websites that can help us to think about our specific purpose and creating a thesis with this. It's so important that you ask yourself these questions. What question am I answering, and what do I need to find out? Understand your topic before you just start searching, and then you can use exploratory research guides to deepen your search. Now, what I love about our local library is that there are databases that are already vetted, they're filtered, they have these credible sources available to us. There's so many different databases to choose from, so as you're thinking about your topic, you might want to choose a more specific database. For me personally, a wide umbrella that works really well is the ERIC library or EBSCO. Another really big database that is really, really strong and student-friendly is Gale. So look for those two databases in your local library. Now, there are two different types of information. There's academic sources and then there's non-academic sources. I found this chart, which I thought was really helpful in organizing that information. Academic texts are critical objective and they're specialized by experts in the field. Non-academic texts are good pieces of information, but when we're working with academic research, we want to make sure we're sticking to that blue column there. We want formal information. We want citations, which are absolutely essential. If you don't see citations at the bottom of the page, there's probably a better source to find. We want to make sure it's focused on an academic audience, not just a general website or web search. It has to be structured and use formal language. So if you don't see all those pieces, if you're doing academic research, you want to look for a different source. Now, there are several common types of information like the news. The news is general public. It's looking for information. It's not necessarily unbiased, and it's not necessarily the best source for academic research. Scholarly journals, government reports, these can be often have more accurate and vetted information. When it comes to blogs and social media, please do not ever use blogs and social media in your academic research. Again, that's not to say that you can't use the SIF method and think carefully and critically about things you're seeing, but you want to make sure your focus is academic. Also, when it comes to being non-biased, All Sides Media is a really great website that updates quite frequently, and it'll tell you what is a left-leaning source or a right-leaning source and what's in the middle. For our purposes, we want to make sure we're utilizing sources that are primarily in the center because we don't want biased information. We want to understand all sides and perspectives, and that's not to say that people aren't valid in having their perspectives and their opinions, but academic research should be non-biased. When you're thinking and asking yourself questions, make sure you ask yourself also who wrote it. If you don't see an author, it's most likely not the best source for you to be using. You need to know who's speaking and who is sending that message as part of that SIFT method. Also, know who published it and when was it published. Is there a bias? Do they cite other sources? Is this information current and reliable? Doing research on a medical issue and finding research from 2015 is going to be so different from a decade plus later. And so you want to make sure that things are current as well. And if you're asking yourself these questions and you're getting no, then it's time to find a different source. Again, I go back to the SIFT method. The SIFT method is all about investigating and asking yourself those questions. Intentionally stop and read what you're using as a source. Don't just blindly grab something, the first thing that pops up, and use it because it's fast. You want it to be reliable. As speakers, we have an ethical responsibility to make sure our information is true. And so reading laterally is a great way to, instead of just scanning it from top to bottom, finding these different pieces of information. So you can check for previous work, go upstream to look at original sources, or I like to go to the works cited and click on the resources that they have linked there and circle back if you're confused. Again, if you're seeing unclear information, that's going to be a good indication to not use that source. In addition to this,
So how do you evaluate a website?
Pause this.
A great way to do so is using the CRAP test.
The CRAP test is one tried and true way to evaluate sources. It stands for currency, relevancy, authorship, accuracy, and purpose. I loved using this for many, many years. Current, most up-to-date information, relevant to the topic that we're talking about. Do we know who the author is, and do we know that information is accurate? And is the purpose to give academic information, or is the purpose clickbait or to sell us something? And so going through that method is also another really great way to evaluate sources. Another great way to evaluate sources is looking at the edu or looking at the URL. If you see /blog in the URL, even if it's from a .edu website, never ever use it. Again, do not ever use blogs. edu.gov.org typically are more reliable information. .com stands for commercial, meaning it's designed to sell you things. So typically .com is not the most reliable website. And .net, anyone can buy a .net and publish whatever they want. So it's just so important. These are not 100% yes or no to use, but just something to keep in mind as you're evaluating your source. I also like these questions of databases are great. Online periodicals or reprints, digital reprints of publications, great. Wikis, blogs, homepages, anything that people can edit themselves or you don't know who's editing it, Those are red flags, and you don't want to use them. When it comes to plagiarism is defined as using others' work or ideas without credibility. The chapter talks about two different types of plagiarism, stealing and sneaking. Stealing is submitting someone else's work as it was your own, or going straight to AI and saying, hey, write this paper for me, and then turning that in. Sneaking is copying different parts or paraphrasing, but really rewriting someone else's work. Okay, I'm not going to read this, but this is from one of my syllabi, the definition of academic honesty. And again, I really want to point out it highlights intentional plagiarism. It highlights taking other people's information, sharing work, using AI to create work and pass it off as your own. These are all ways to plagiarize. And doing partial plagiarism, or what's called patchwork plagiarism, where you just take a couple ideas from different places and pop it into your own, is still plagiarism. You need to do your own academic work. Academic honesty and ethics in this area are so important to our credibility. Now, I've got a couple of different ways that you can create citations. So when you've got research, you have to cite it out loud. Now, you can go onto a local library website and look for MLA formatting. The Purdue OWL actually has the best and most robust resources, so you are welcome to go there as well. I love using Noodle Tools. Noodle Tools is something I've used for years. MyBib is another resource that is new and free, and that's been really great too. But just to kind of walk you through, if you're using Noodle Tools, which is available through most public libraries, you click on New Project, and in our course, you're selecting MLA, and you want the most up-to-date version of MLA. From there, you're going to add sources and create citations, determine what type of database it's used, build out that citation, and then export it. Now, MyBib works very similarly. There are ways for those websites to support you and to help create the initial piece of the citation, and then you fill in the blanks. Again, know who your author is, know where the source is coming from, and evaluate it as you're doing that process. Like I said, MyBib is free, and this works really similarly to Noodle Tools with less clicks, so I definitely would encourage you to use this as well. So what are the takeaways? Research strengthens your argument. Evaluating information, do it critically through lateral reading and the SIFT method, and then cite all sources in written format and orally. Remember to handle research with care. We all have an ethical responsibility to research effectively, and so it's so important that you take care with this, and please ask questions as you have them along the way.